One of the hardest things about trying to tell a story is trying to find the story to begin with. So, what does one talk about? Does one choose to be controversial? In today's climate, it requires a certain anger at or for the establishment, or at or for the issue. And unfortunately, anger ends up like, a hot, full horse who, being allowed his way, self-metal tires him. You are listening to Tales of Myanmar. Join me as I tell you what it's like to live as a Westerner in Myanmar. Hear about what it means to live here and why I do it. These are simple observations of a land with 3 seasons, no cold snaps, an ancient history, and one that is currently embroiled in a devastating civil war. So what does one say? Talking about politics simply wearies me. Not because I don't have an opinion, God knows I do, but I see friends both informed and uninformed blast about in their tiger-footed rage, telling me that this person is bad, or that this person is good, or that this person should be killed, or that this person should remain. And while I understand their fury, if not their words, I find it also trifling and inconsequential. So, no to politics. Then what's left? Do I speak on love? Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. I am certain that I should keep my mouth shut on this topic as well. I know that my mother loved me, and my father as well, but in a way that in retrospect can only seem as conditional. I've never been greeted with weeping open arms of joy, and at this point I'm pretty sure I never will. And while I don't lament that, and I find that it affects me little, it certainly disqualifies me from any objective truth that I might relay on the topic of love. And so the search continues. I am profoundly unqualified to speak on marriage. While I admire it as an institution, and surely it's a respite for those who would procreate and wish to spend their time with one who is devoted to them, I find that it is not for me, and not just because I don't choose it. Shall I speak on friendship? Shakespeare, if he has taught me nothing else, he has shown me that most friendship is feigning, and most loving is folly. I'm not certain I have friends. It's hard to define a term when so many conditions apply based on who you're speaking to and who you find intellectually attractive enough to have a conversation with. I believe that mutual respect and strong alliances are important, but friendship has always seemed to me to be special and separate from love and mere acquaintance. So once again, I find myself inadequately educated to expound in any meaningful way detail on friendship and its quixotic nature. Perhaps I can make some sort of stab at life. Perhaps I can address the nature of the walking shadow. After all, we are such stuff as dreams are made on. Life, however, in its analysis, has been relegated to those far more educated and in tune with its nature than I. Great philosophers still struggle with its meaning. Who am I? Who am I but a brief, unfocused, and dull flash in a very small pan? I find myself to be far too self-centered to wax intelligently on this great stage of fools. Perhaps I can speak on the environment, but how does one balance the practical with the idea that if our life were exempt from public haunt, we would find tongues in trees and books in running brooks and sermons and the stone and good in everything? I find sorting my trash is annoying, but the destruction of our wild habitat to be foolish. And while that is sort of a dichotomous position, I find that once again in modern times we are black and white on this issue and have a great deal of trouble reconciling the deforestation of the Amazon and killing Bambi with the responsibilities of dominion. I could speak on fathers. I had one. He was as good as a man can be. We are, after all, a certain percentage a product of our own environment. I often wonder what my father would make of these modern times. He died before the towers fell, so it's hard to know where he would stand. And contrary to my training, I would not have my father look with my eyes. So what does one create a self-centered blog about? For ultimately, all blogs are self-centered. They're either made for money or they're made for self-aggrandizement. And personally, I'd like to think I'm doing this as a record, but then I wonder, a record for whom? So I decided some 8 or 9 years ago that my documentation would be strictly my opinions about things which I had actually experienced. It's one thing to go on modern social media and absolutely excoriate your political opponents with witty comments and trolling. And it's another to have a first-hand point of view. So, at the risk of sounding like one of those people who spent a gap year abroad and now thinks they're smarter on international issues than everybody else in their home country, I decided to make this. First, it was about China, in which I droned on about geopolitical nonsense of which I have no knowledge. And then one day it hit me. However limited my point of view may be, it is factual as a first-person account can be, which means it's invested with opinion, experience, attitude, and ultimately, hopefully, truth. And as much as I hate the phrase, this is my truth. Currently, in Myanmar, there are a dozen or so factions fighting a war, sometimes together, sometimes apart, against a man who decided that the election held in Myanmar for someone to lead the country was invalid and overthrew the actual government. I would call this unusual, but it's not in Southeast Asia. I would call this freedom, but in fact it's only caused economic ruin and the crushing of traditional values that do not align with the state. From everything I've read, the person elected to serve was, in fact, not particularly great either. But to take something that is not yours is, in my Judeo-Christian opinion, still theft. So how does one balance my personal attitudes and try to give you a perspective on the status of Myanmar? Again, I can only tell you what I experience. I have been in Myanmar for 6 or 7 months now, and I can tell you unequivocally it is the most difficult place I have ever lived. The people are nice. In general, on the surface, the people of Asia are nice. But one does have to wonder what it is in their makeup that causes an almost constant state of war for 100 years inside of a country that is otherwise, on its surface, nice. I can tell you what it's like when I say it's difficult to live here. I mean that it's a rookery, a dump, and most certainly a rat hole. Between the unavailability of common goods and no way to retrieve them in an easy manner from another country, the undrinkable water, a system under which landlords require tenants to pay for repairs, and the general disrepair of nearly every building, it is, quite honestly, I say again, the most difficult place I have ever lived. Ironically, I have always believed that I am where I am for a reason. I don't believe God puts us places, but I do believe we put ourselves in places either as punishment or as an attempt at some sort of restoration of mental, spiritual, and emotional homeostasis. I'm still discovering which I've chosen. I can tell you also, I am happy to be here. I have a good job, and I enjoy the work. The people are pleasant, and the food can be surprisingly delicious. And outside of the blatant, cacophonous Buddhist monks that visit my street in the early hours of every morning, I find this to be a peaceful and quiet city, full of kind and resourceful people. So I am, in fact, profoundly grateful. You have been listening to the Tales of Myanmar. My name is Michael Rice. Thank you for taking the time to listen to a brief discussion of my life in Myanmar. If you've liked what you've heard, please subscribe, and remember, ultimately, past is prologue. And as for me, my necessaries are embarked. Farewell.